interpreters today, ASL interpreter Craig Ridgway and ASL interpreter Erica Argamonte. Instructions on how to pin their video will be found in the chat. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Siegel. I use he, him pronouns, and I've been a member of the Civilian Complaint Review Board working on this board since 2016. I'm sitting in today for our chair who's unavailable. And I thank you for joining us today in the hottest CCRB meeting of the year. Let's have the board members introduce themselves. Why don't we start from the right? Joe.
Hi, Joe Fox, NYPD rep, Commissioner's representative. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Kevin Jamot, Mayor Designee.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Puma. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm the City Council designee from Manhattan.
Good afternoon, Esmeralda Simmons, Public Advocate appointee from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn.
As I stated earlier, John Siegel, I'm a mayoral appointee.
John Dorsch, Executive Director of the CCRB. I use he, him pronouns.
A.U. Hogan, Representative City Council.
June Northern, mayoral appointing for Brooklyn.
Good afternoon,
Pat Smith, mayoral appointee.
Good afternoon, Frank Dwyer, Police Commissioner Designee.
The first order of business is adoption of the minutes of the June meeting. Are there any changes or corrections that any member of the board wishes to make? Oh, we have two board members who are joining us virtually. Let's have them introduce themselves, starting. Herman Merritt. You're there and want to introduce yourself. Please go ahead. Noted for the record. So, if
I'm sorry,
proposed, changes.
Hello, I'm sorry. I'm Charlene Brown, Police Commissioner Designee.
Thank you. Ask for a motion to approve the June board minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Any opposition? The minutes are approved. Begin this meeting by acknowledging that July 2024 marks 10 years since the murder of Eric Garner. I think two other members of this board remember voting on the case involving Mr. Garner's death. And I believe it exemplifies the importance of independent and impartial oversight in this board's role. We've had thousands of cases since, high profile, low profile, no profile. The investigators, the staff, the board treat them all diligently and seeking fair and appropriate outcomes. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the City Council and the Mayor's Office for recognizing the importance of the CCRB through not only restoring our budget, but also providing additional funding for personnel. And we're all eager to hear the Executive Director's report where he'll detail that. So I turn it over to you, Mr. Dorsch.
Thanks, John, and thank you for stepping in today. On June 30th, the City Council voted to adopt the new budget for fiscal year 2025. This budget, which totals $27,802,694 for the CCRB and sets the agency's headcount at 247 individuals, is baseline for future years as well. As a result, the agency is moving forward to hire an additional 18 individuals, including, most importantly, a new class of investigators. At the June board meeting, a member of the public asked for information about New York State Senate Bill 3515. This bill seeks to shift the financial burden of police misconduct settlements away from New York City taxpayers to officers implicated in the lawsuits. The bill would also require all police officers to maintain personal liability insurance plans that would cover any claims made against them while on duty. The bill was introduced in January 2023 and is sponsored by State Senator Natalia Fernandez and Assembly Member Alicia Heineman. No action was happened on the bills in either house during the past session, and I do not know what is going to happen with them in the next session. In our public session today, we're going to hear from folks who are online and then folks who are physically present. Regardless of which method you're going to be giving statements tonight, please limit your comments to 4 minutes. Our office is open for walk-in complaints, but it is also possible to file complaints online at nyc.gov/CCRB complaint. You can also file a complaint over the phone by calling 1-800-341-2272 or by dialing 311. The CCRB also accepts complaints via social media, which you can make by tagging the agency at CCRB_NYC on Instagram, and I still call it Twitter. If you'd like to make an in-person complaint this afternoon, investigators Rob Ryan and Emma Stidehar are here and ready to speak with you. Amy O'Sullivan is also here from the Civilian Assistance Unit. Thanks, John.
Questions for Mr. Darsh? I'll exercise the prerogative since I have the chair today and ask, what did you mean by the budget being baseline for future years? What does that mean?
So every year when the city council passes a budget, they don't just vote on the upcoming year's budget. They vote on budgets for future years as well for planning purposes. In the fiscal year 2024 adopted budget, the CCRB's budget was actually, I know the headcount numbers exactly, was set at 259 for the fiscal year that just ended. But that was not baseline, so it dropped again to 237, which it was before the adopted budget for the out years. In this year's budget, not only was our headcount increased to 247, it's set that way for the out years that were also voted on, which were at least 3 years afterward. And that is also true for the dollar side of the budget as well.
Great. Other questions for the executive director? Pat?
Mr. Chair, would like to move that this board commend our chair, Barbara Rice, and our executive director, Jonathan Darsh, for their diligence and persistence in securing the funding needed for this agency to continue its work.
All in favor of that resolution to commend the leadership? I certainly vote aye. Any opposed?
Magnificent job.
I'm told the first speaker, who I guess is lined up virtually, is the New York City Council representative for the 22nd Council District in Northeast Queens, Tiffany Caban. Welcome to our meeting, and the floor is yours.
Apologies, council member. We're unable to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, beautiful. Thank you. I just wanted to start by saying thank you for having me and thank you for the work that you've been doing. Like was mentioned, my name is Councilmember Tiffany Caban. I represent the 22nd District, actually in the northwestern part of Queens, and my district does also include Rikers Island. I'm also a former public defender who practiced in New York County criminal courts, and I am here to briefly address a practice of the CCRB that I do find deeply concerning. It's the widely reported requirement that investigators list a complainant's entire criminal legal history in their final reports. This practice was publicly criticized by the chair of the CCRB 7 years ago, but inexplicably it has yet to change. It's something that happens regardless of whether a complainant's criminal legal background is relevant to the investigation or not. And it's done without informing the complainant, getting their consent, or even letting them know their history is being assessed. Meanwhile, the CCRB investigators are asked to include the accused officer's CCRB history, which lists past complaints against them, but not their criminal history. So, I find it to be a hypocrisy and a double standard at work here, and I find it to be quite breathtaking. The practice of dredging up this irrelevant information and using it against complainants is intended to paint them in a negative light before their complaints are even considered. It prejudices and taints the procedure. It has the effect of reinforcing racial inequalities within the criminal legal system, and in addition, it discourages people from filing complaints. If civilians who come forward with legitimate concerns about police misconduct fear their past will unfairly be used against them, they're less likely to report problems. And this undermines the entire purpose of the CCRB to hold police accountable. And I want to close by saying that the CCRB should focus on the facts of the case, not unrelated, irrelevant, and prejudicial background information. And thank you for allowing me the time to testify today.
Did you want to respond or anyone have comments?
So first, I want to thank the council member for bringing this to our attention. It's actually an issue that staff has been concerned about for some time and bring it up. We've been discussing it in meetings, how best to address it. And it's something that if the board would like, we could come back in September and maybe have a more fulsome conversation about it.
Any other board members? Ms. Simmons?
I certainly would like, I've questioned it too. I certainly would like us to have a full conversation about it with some factual background from staff and administration. It's thrown in there at the end. Some people pay attention to it, some don't. But I also, if complainants knew that was going to happen, many of them would not file a complaint.
Any other comments? I will say, as in quarterly reports, I don't remember a case where a civilian's criminal history has been a subject of discussion, nor do I think it has affected at least my consideration of cases. Of course, what I can't know is what's in the head of other board members that may be sub rosa and not expressed. And I certainly understand the concern you're raising. And I don't think there's opposition, John, to the staff coming back with a recommendation on how to deal with this.
Excellent.
Mr. Hogan?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember, for that. I think that one of the things that she said also was that the investigators, and whether they look at it in a biased way when they get it, and we might not vote on it in a panel in such a way, but we don't know if investigators see, and I never knew what was really the cause for that record to even be on it. So I think we should really convene and to have another conversation. I'm glad this conversation was brought up by the Councilmember Caban, because it's always in a sense been troubling to me and also questioning to me why it was ever there. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
Council member, a slightly related subject. This is a 15-member body, but it has only 12 members at this point. We are 3 members short. That means one full panel that is not hearing cases. We have 3-member panels that review cases every month. We are 1 panel short. The city council speaker is responsible for 2 of those vacancies. Could you please urge upon the city council speaker to make some appointments to get this up to strength so that complainants and officers get justice in a more speedy fashion? Thank you.
I mean, absolutely. And I would be happy to not just ask the speaker to do that, but also, I think there are plenty of good folks that would be ready and willing to serve in that capacity.
Thank you, council member. I'm not sure you've used your whole 4 minutes allotment, which is rare for speakers at our meetings. Is there anything you wanted to add or?
That's okay. I'm defying the expectations of a lawyer and a politician, and I am just trying to be succinct. I'm not going to belabor it, especially when it seems like there's consensus among the members that this is something that needs to be revisited. So just thank you for the time.
And thank you for zooming in. We appreciate your participation today. Next, we have a presentation from the Director of Outreach, Jahai Rose.
Good evening, everyone.
As mentioned, my name is Jahai Rose. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Outreach for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Just want to give you some brief information about what the agency does and provide you with some updates about what we've been doing in the Borough of Queens. So the CCRB is the nation's largest independent and oversight entity over the largest police force in the country. The CCRB investigates, mediates, and prosecutes complaints of misconduct alleged against members of the NYPD. The agency is governed by a 15-member board, many of which you've met today. 5 seats are appointed by the New York City Mayor, 5 are appointed by the New York City Council, 3 are designated by the Police Commissioner, and 1 is appointed by the New York City Public Advocate. The chair is jointly appointed by the mayor and the New York City Council. The agency can investigate 4 types of complaints. FATO is a acronym that we typically use for help folks remember what our jurisdiction is. That's force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and offensive language. If you'd like to report complaints of police misconduct, as previously mentioned, you can feel free to send a complaint in online at nyc.gov/CCRB complaint. That's nyc.gov CCRB complaint. You can also call the CCRB's hotline at 1-800-341-CCRB. If you see footage of misconduct on social media or in news media, you can feel free to file a complaint with our agency as well, even if you are not there in person. The agency's handle is normally at ccrb_NYC. Other ways to file a complaint with the agency include calling 311. You can also visit the office at our headquarters at 100 Church Street in Lower Manhattan, zip code 10007. You could also file a complaint. You can also tag the CCRB on social media. That's at Facebook. We call it Twitter over here, also called X. And you could also follow. You could also tag us in or direct message us on Instagram. You can also send a complaint through mail at 100 Church Street, New York, 10th floor, and that's zip code 10007. You could file a complaint at any police precinct. You could also request a self-addressed envelope and a complaint form and mail that complaint straight to us. Officers are required, or the precinct is required, to take that complaint in the building. So I'll hand this over to our Queens Outreach Coordinator, Natasha Diaz, to give you the Queens update.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the Queens Outreach. Okay, kind of short. Good evening, everyone. My name is Natasha. I'm the Queens Outreach Coordinator. So far for this year, we've connected with 2,396 New Yorkers. We've had 93 outreach events. I've been able to partner with 40 new partners. We received 429 complaints in 2024. 472 of them were closed and 110 of them were substantiated. A few of the notable partnerships that I've been able to make in Queens has been with the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Using the CCRB's Block by Block initiative, we assisted with voters registration while educating the public on the authority and jurisdiction of the CCRB. I also partnered with the Community Capacity Development, where NYCHA Astoria Housing, this year, they celebrated 365 days of no fatalities due to gun violence. So they included us in their celebration, and we were out there tabling and educating the public. They also invited us to participate in the same Safe Summer 2024 for Queensbridge, Astoria, and Woodside NYCHA Housing. I was also able to partner with the LGBT network. They've invited us to facilitate a couple presentations and table at a couple of their events. And I've had an awesome experience partnering with Jamaica Community Partnership. They've invited us so far to participate in about 8 events, and we've been able to educate 339 members of the public. The first picture is of me out with community capacity development at their Occupy the Corner. That usually happens at 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning, specifically targeting those people that are out at that time, making sure that we get as much a broad community engagement as possible. I also was able to do a lot of block by block participation with New York City Campaign Finance Board. We were out in East Elmhurst, Corona, quite a bit of neighborhoods that speak multiple languages, and we've been able to educate in multiple languages. And that's been my experience in New York. Oh, let's not forget, we participated in the 2024 New Queens Pride Parade. That's also with the LGBT network, and we had an awesome time. A couple of our outreach team went out, and we had a great time as well. So thank you for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Jahai.
So if you'd like to receive, one, I'm proud of the work that our unit is doing, definitely out in Queens, connecting with members of the public. If you would like to request an outreach presentation from the CCRB, feel free to contact us on outreach via email on outreach@ccrb.nyc.gov. And always remember, you could follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.
Any board members have questions or comments for Jahai or Natasha? The public comment portion of the meeting, we will begin with those joining us virtually who would like to make a comment, followed by those who are joining us in person. If you're participating virtually, please use the raise your hand feature and please keep your comments to 4 minutes. Yahira, would you please call on the first participant?
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. We'll first be hearing from Senator Jabari Brisport.
Thank you so much for having this hearing and for also giving me time to speak, and also for the work you do. I'll be brief because I actually came here without knowing that Councilmember Caban would echo the same concern. So I just wanted to reiterate her comments. Thank you for your responses. I'm looking forward to seeing if you are able to produce a recommendation for the September meeting. As I heard, I do see this practice as a potential form of victim blaming and even potential character assassination if the criminal history is unrelated to the case, and would hate for that to impact the justice that complainants are seeking. So once again, thank you for hearing both of us out. Same concerns, so I won't use my full 4 minutes, and I did hear your responses to the council member earlier, and I did appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Yahira, who's next?
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Chris Dunn.
John, can you hear me? Can you folks hear me?
Yes, your volume is a little low, but we can hear you.
Okay, well, hopefully it'll be louder. Good afternoon, I'm Chris Dunn with the New York Civil Liberties Union. Thank you, John and John. John Siegel, nice to see you in the captain's chair. And I do want to note my appreciation of your noting the 10-year anniversary of the Garner killing. That was an important moment in CCRB history in terms of the work the agency did, which was important. And it was a tragedy that reverberates to this day in New York City. So I appreciate your acknowledging that. John Darsh, I did have a question for you about the budget, which is good news. I think the public would be interested in hearing, does that mean the agency will be able to restore its practice of investigating all complaints?
Goal is to do that as soon as possible. The timing is going to be on how fast we are able to hire up on at least one new class of investigators, so that we have the capacity to do the work that the public expects us to do.
Okay, thank you. And then John Siegel, I don't want to get ahead of the agenda, but I am curious if the board is going to be discussing the disclosures that appeared on the front page of the Times last week concerning the NYPD's retention of cases. Because if that's going to be on the agenda, I would just wait to hear the conversation. But if it's not, I'd like to encourage discussion about that. And I'd be particularly interested in hearing from the police department representatives about their view about the police commissioner's practices as detailed in that reporting.
Well, you've just put it on the agenda, so it's on the agenda, Chris. Anyone want to comment on the issue? I would just say that I had a question that I wanted to raise with the staff, and that's whether there's been any analysis done of the types of cases that are being retained, or if there's any pattern to that. I didn't see that in the press reports, and I don't know if that's something that has been analyzed, but would be interested to know.
So we have looked for patterns, but we have not, none have jumped out that, and there has not been a statistical level analysis to see if there's a significant difference in types of cases. But just as a layperson looks at the types of cases, nothing pops out as a pattern. I think it's important to note that this police commissioner has closed more cases overall in, I guess now, exactly a year than his predecessor did in a year and a half. And so some of the, when you look at the raw numbers, they are higher than his, not just immediate predecessor, but predecessors generally, but it's also the volume of cases that he is closing is much higher. So it is, it bears more analysis, and I'm not quite prepared to get into the details right now.
Any other comments on it? Chris, did you have other comments you wanted to make on that or other subjects with your time?
Well, I'm surprised and disappointed there's no board conversation about this. This is a major issue. I am been troubled recently. The CCRB gets little attention. This agency should have a lot more attention. That's the most attention. There are not too many times the CCRB is above the fold, 2 columns on the front page of the New York Times. And I'm taken aback that there's no broad board discussion about that reporting. One thing that I will say in terms of thinking ahead, I don't know if the board's going to think about this. I don't know if the staff is going to think about this. We are certainly going to think about the issue of whether or not the city should be revisiting the police commissioner's authority to retain cases, given these reports. And given what we see in your reporting, which is always very good. I always commend the CCRB for its reporting about the practices we are now seeing with this administration and this police commissioner. And as John mentions, a lot of cases are getting closed. There are huge claimed SOL closures or holding of cases. There's the retention problem. And I think the time has come for the board to start thinking about whether or not it needs to revisit the agreements with the police commissioner, under which the police commissioner now is allowed to retain cases in the way that he is, because it certainly appears that is becoming a significant barrier to police accountability and to the work of the CCRB.
Any other questions or comments?
I look forward to the report from staff on the retention of cases, and we have within the executive director's report and are reporting to us regarding the short SOLs, which is very troubling.
Thank
I
you.
think this month was I want to commend the policy unit for they broke out in the monthly report for the first time the closures for short SOL by the department. And I think it's interesting to note the timelines on some of these cases that are being closed short SOL. I am trying to remember the figure number to point to it. If you give me 1 second.
And for those of you that don't speak CCRB verb, SOL means statute of limitations. That means that there's 6 months, only 6 months left on the statute of limitations.
So in 2024 so far, the police department has closed 45 cases against members of service who have at least one substantiated complaint from the CCRB, at least one substantiated allegation from the CCRB. Of those 45 officers, only 2 had complaints that were voted on between 10 and 20 days of the expiration of the SOL. In 32 of those 45 complaints, the board voted within between 60 and 90 days of the SOL. So to call these cases being closed short SOL is a little bit of a misnomer. And these are cases of discipline in which the board has conducted an investigation, reviewed them, and determined that misconduct occurred. And it appears that the department closes them without even reviewing them at all. And so that is troubling, that between 2 to 3 months is not enough time to review cases that have already gone through a full investigation.
And Mr. Dunn, I'll add from the position of a police department designee, that it doesn't surprise me, given that I often disagree with my colleagues here on the board on whether a case should be substantiated or not. It doesn't surprise me that the police commissioner disagrees. We each vote from our own experience, our own knowledge of the law, our own knowledge of procedures. I think each of us on this board votes from the place of authenticity. So it doesn't surprise me at all that many of the cases they're looked at in the police department, a different disposition is decided upon.
I think Mr. Merritt might want to say something online.
Mr. Merritt, you're muted.
Let me just add in response to the last comment. We work very hard, all of us here, to decide cases on the merits. And we understand we're in a system where final disciplinary decision-making is with the commissioner. But I know, speaking personally, it is both frustrating and contrary to the purpose that we serve to have cases retained and not decided on the merits. If the police commissioner wants to exercise his discretion to reach a different outcome, that's his power. But those should be, to the maximum extent possible, meritorious decisions with reasoned actions following from them. Anything else, Chris? Oh, sure, Joe.
Point
Go
out
ahead.
one thing, there is a distinction between cases closed short SOL and then cases that are retained. Cases closed short SOL are complaints in which at least one allegation is substantiated against a member of service, and the board is recommending either a command discipline level B, a command discipline level A, or formalized training be imposed on that officer. So those are not retained cases. Those are non-APU cases that aren't covered by the 2012 MOU, and the Department Advocate's Office is the one that handles those disciplinary matters, and they routinely close the cases they are closing as short SOL, they are not reviewing at all. In retained cases, the police commissioner makes a determination on APU cases whether or not to allow the CCRB to have jurisdiction on the matter, or if the police department will retain jurisdiction and then move forward with the disciplinary process on its own. So far in 2024, the police commissioner has retained 20 cases against members of service, but has imposed discipline of some type upon those 20 officers. And then a further 14 members of service where the police commissioner retained the case and then decided not to issue any discipline at all. So while there are 34 cases that were retained this year, there was discipline imposed in 20.
Thank you for that. Anything else, Chris? Ira, who's the next?
Next, we'll be hearing from Michael Myers.
Why don't we move on, Ira, and circle back to him if he reappears?
Yes, we're trying to upgrade him at the moment. That's the last person with their hand raised. In the meantime, if Mr. Merritt was able to unmute.
Mr. Merritt, did you have a comment?
And Mr. Myers, are you able to hear us? Mr. Myers,
Online, wishing to speak, Ira?
that's the last person. That's after Michael Myers, that would conclude our public session. I don't know if we want to give Michael Myers just one more chance. I feel like he was briefly unmuted. Unfortunately, Mr. Myers, it looks like you are unmuted, but we were unable to hear you. Apologies, it looks like we have some technical issues on for Mr. Myers to speak.
You let us know if those are rectified. For those joining us in person who are interested in making a public comment, please feel free to line up behind the podium and keep your comments to 4 minutes. Good afternoon. The first speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to the board for holding this meeting and for listening to all of us. I'm here to talk about the same thing as Councilmember Caban and Senator Brisport. I won't belabor the point either. I think that they laid out the issue really compellingly and clearly. My name is Lydia Woolley. I'm here as a former investigator and a current member of the public, so ideally I can offer a little bit more context, some details that may be useful to you. and underscore the urgency of this issue because as much as I don't want to belabor it, and I believe that you will address it in a future meeting, it is disturbing to me that there's seemingly been the will to change this practice for the past 7 years at least, but it hasn't changed. And so I hope I can offer some useful points in that direction. So for those who don't know, but Councilmember Caban did lay this out, every single civilian whose complaint is investigated by the CCRB has their entire lifelong criminal history in the state of New York revealed in the closing report. And those closing reports are accessible to the entire agency and ultimately submitted to the board, which reviews them in order to recommend whether officers should face discipline or not. This is not a best practice in police misconduct investigations. It's proven to be discriminatory and has no relevance to the investigations themselves. I'm not talking about convictions that are relevant to the CCRB's cases because, of course, when a complainant has been convicted of a crime and that conviction is directly relevant to their allegation of misconduct, investigators include details of that conviction in the body of the closing report. I'm talking about a laundry list of convictions included on the very last page, after all arguments have already been rigorously made based on facts and evidence, an addendum which serves only to leave a vague impression that perhaps the complainant is bad or not credible or doesn't deserve to be treated with civility and respect. More than anything, the criminal history section amounts to a huge waste of time. Each investigator spends anywhere between 15 minutes to an hour on every single case, finding and writing up criminal histories that they and their supervisors have deemed to be completely irrelevant to the facts of the case. Time is, of course, as we all know, an extremely valuable resource to the CCRB. And even after it was determined that investigators don't have the resources to investigate misconduct within their jurisdiction, they were still expected to search up criminal histories which have nothing to do with their investigations. And as Councilmember Caban mentioned, and I think this is a really important point, investigators don't tell complainants that their conviction history will be revealed to the board, much less ask their permission to reveal it. That's a huge breach of privacy and trust. So as well as being a waste of time and a breach of privacy and a breach of trust, this is a blatantly racist practice. There's endless evidence that Black and other non-white people are much more likely to be arrested and charged for a crime than white people who commit the same crime. And by including conviction histories in closing reports, the CCRB is citing a system that is proven to be biased against people of color. Stop and frisk arrests, for example, which have been deemed unconstitutional, still exist on people's records and are cited in the CCRB's closing reports. But even in an alternate universe where race is not central to criminal convictions, no one should feel afraid to request an investigation into police misconduct based on their personal history with the law. Police oversight is particularly important for those who have regular contact with the police, and they should not be made to feel like this institution is more interested in digging up their past than serving them as members of the public. This is so widely understood that even when the Internal Affairs Bureau investigates things like biased policing, they do not include complainants' criminal histories in the closing report. That makes the CCRB, an independent agency, far less progressive on this issue than the NYPD's investigative unit itself. As an investigator, I was always embarrassed to write up conviction histories because they potentially biased the board, although I do trust all of your judgment, but I worked extremely hard to write fact-based and impartial reports, and this felt like the only real introduction of bias. I had been hired to investigate police misconduct and along the way had somehow fallen into investigating those who had experienced it. So I'll reiterate, I'm almost done, but I'll reiterate that I'm here because I really believe in this work and I believe in this agency and all of my amazing and hardworking colleagues here, or former colleagues. But in order for the CCRB to effectively investigate police misconduct, the agency must maintain credibility in the eyes of the public. It's only a matter of time before the inclusion of criminal histories on closing reports breaks the bond of trust between the CCRB and the public. And so I believe that the board needs to take the extremely simple and crucial step of removing the criminal history section from closing reports, both for the sake of the public and the integrity of the agency. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for your perspective and sharing your experience as an agency investigator. Anyone have any questions, comments?
Mention that I believe that the criminal history of not only complainants but victims, so they're not always the same, are included as well. I would like to make sure that that's covered as well.
Understood. I think there are 2 points I'd like to make. First is that any change to the closing report won't really save much time on the investigator side, because you're still going to need to do the searches, because you can't evaluate whether the history is relevant without having the history. So just to my colleagues who are currently investigating cases, I don't want you to think that you're not going to have to get the criminal histories, even if this policy does change. And I also want to point out to members of the public that when we get FOIL requests for closing reports, we do not turn over civilian criminal history. So while the board may have it, it is not accessible to people just by filing a FOIL request. But as I said, we will do a more focused analysis on how the inclusion of the criminal history may impact whether or not investigation is substantiated or not.
The next speaker.
Hello, my name is Mari Moss, and I just wanted to cover a few things that I heard today. That last piece, and especially what Senator Jabari Brisport and Councilmember Tiffany Caban and the young lady before me, Lydia, stated, is very disturbing to hear. On a number of things, just even thinking about Eric Gardner, that fact that people would blame the victim for being harmed, killed by the police. Blaming the victim is never a good scenario for not even public trust, but even just for plain humanity. So hopefully this policy is changed. Again, I want to commend the CCRB for getting funding in the budget. That is a good thing. I'm hoping that there's going to be more outreach in communities, especially Harlem. So this past Saturday, as I was coming from choir rehearsal, I see a young African-American man getting pulled over by he was just walking down the street with a friend. And, first it was 2 police officers, then there were 4 police officers, then there were 4 police cars, then there were 12 officers, all for this one person. And I'm watching the whole thing, and people are taking out their video cameras and videotaping and so forth. But you didn't hear what the young man was charged for. You didn't see anything that had happened. It must have, whatever happened some blocks away. It's just what is happening with our police force when they're coming to arrest someone, that they need 12 officers on one person and 4 to 5 cop cars. And then as I was scanning the police cars, they're coming from all these different precincts. We're in the 3-2 precinct, but they're coming from PSA 6. They're coming from other precincts that are out of the jurisdiction. And it's, what is going on here? So, and then this young man looks like, and his friend is yelling, he's a victim, but nobody knows what's going on or what the charges are and so forth. So I would love to ask for the outreach of the CCRB to come and just do more outreach in Harlem. I know that the community board is on hiatus over the summer months, but if there's a special meeting that can take place at the Schoenberg or even in some churches, or community centers, I think it's worth it, because people need to know what their rights are when they're being arrested. And now I'm going to be fully transparent. Even with this new budget piece, I would love to see a domestic violence designee, someone that focuses primarily on cases that are, where people are arrested on domestic violence. Because what you find is the police themselves don't seem to know a lot of the laws. And even though I serve on a mayor's task force that is supposed to train police officers on what the laws are, what are ways to handle domestic violence or intimate partner violence cases, they don't seem to know. So they arrest both the victim and the perpetrator, and then there's no way to know which is which. And then that's further harm done to the person who is the victim. Because if the victim is arrested, then they've already been abused. Now there's further abuses that can take place. And full transparency, this happened to me in front of my children. I'm being arrested for checking up on my children. The police officers take me into the precinct. I get arrested. I get zapped with a taser while I'm handcuffed. They shackle me at the ankles, until I end up in Rikers Island Prison. And Rikers Island Prison is a whole new way of hostility or traumatization, because they want you to take all of your clothes off and look into your faculties. And I think that when you are going through a domestic violence situation and you are treated in that way by the police that are supposed to protect and serve or protect us from situations that are happening in our lives, it causes further grief, further devastation, further traumatization. So I would just like to, again, hone up on the fact that we need more community education in our communities, more outreach in our communities that are going to help citizens know what their actual rights are, how police officers are supposed to approach them, and do we really need 12 officers arresting one person when they're not even armed? They have no weapons, they have no anything. So do we really need them to be, do we need that many police officers on one person? So those are the things that I just wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, John.
So I just wanted to say first, thank you for sharing your experience with us. I think it was very powerful and important for us to hear what happened with you. And you mentioned something about a domestic violence designee. I was hoping you could explain that more to me, because I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
I would like to see someone who is sensitive to the natures of intimate partner violence, is well versed in how to triage those situations, and if they are arrested and there's some police misconduct that takes place, that they're able to, with a proper training lens or a trained lens, would be able to provide stronger oversight in those particular cases. I think those cases should even be tracked. Like we can even track how many people are being arrested for reporting domestic violence, because I saw an article that said 86% of women that are in Rikers Island are there because they reported abuse. So if there are all these, people that are being arrested for abuse, how many of them are sending in complaints to the CCRB, or how many, police officers? If we can just track that data, somebody that's a designee focused on that could be a way to track that data.
A staff member or a board member? I guess that's what we're trying to understand when you say designee.
Both. If we could have a board member that is skilled in that realm, as well as an investigator that can ensure that those numbers are being tracked, and that the disciplinary actions are taken properly.
John, with the budget being restored, are we going to go back to the communities like we did last year? I mean, I know we're already in July, but I mean, is that a future thing?
I think it is something we are looking forward to restarting in 2025.
I'd like to make please don't leave. I'd like to make a distinction between, thank you first of all for your testimony, between cases that the CCRB receives that allege sexual violence or domestic violence, are involved in a domestic violence situation, and cases that NYPD receives that are domestic violence or partner violence. First of all, we don't track every case that goes to NYPD. And I think that they do track them. I'll put it like this. I thought they were tracking them. I thought that they had specialty officers for those cases. And I'm going to say thought because maybe that went out the window with some other stuff. And several police administrations before. I don't follow the police department that closely. I just remember vaguely, maybe 20 years ago, that this was a big issue. And I thought that there were units set up for domestic violence victims to be interviewed. And even if they're arrested, to be interviewed, in a sensitive way by someone who has history, and maybe to get the situation resolved that they don't have to go to Rikers or whatever. So that is something that I'm putting to the side. And I do think that, since you're on this commission, that you need to flex a little elbow grease with the department to get that information. I am very concerned about our cases because we have jurisdiction over sexual misconduct by officers. And not necessarily in a domestic violence situation. But if it occurs in a domestic violence situation, it would still be under our jurisdiction. And that we do track. There was, I'm thankful for your really raising this because when we received our jurisdiction, there were advocates that urged us, I'm talking about CCRB, to have special dedicated people or at least one person that was going to handle these cases or at least advise on these cases and maybe advise the complainants. That was not something that was imposed upon us. It was something that we could do if we wanted to do it. So I'm separating that out from what NYPD does, and now the jurisdiction of CCRB, particularly around police misconduct, sexual misconduct. And that's something that you may want to hone in on a little more with us. Again, I'd like the obviously administration to talk about what we've done. It was not adopted by this board to hire people just to do that. But I do believe that we have taken some action in that regard. So I would like that question to be responded to because I know that we do not have the stats on what NYPD does.
Yes, because the problem also is that you have abusers who are able to use the system as their extended arms to to further victimize a victim, and that's what we got to be watchful of.
So I appreciate both what you said and what Ms. Simmons said, but it is difficult. I think, as Ms. Simmons said, they're not quite the same issue because the use of the criminal justice system by an abuser is not necessarily an issue that CCRB can handle. But people who are victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence are often more susceptible to sexual harassment by authority figures such as a member of service. And so when we do get complaints about sexual harassment or other types of sexual misconduct against victims of domestic abuse, we do investigate those. We have special investigators who have gone through special training. We try to incorporate that training into the general level of training that we give all of our investigators, but we do make sure that before we assign those sensitive type cases that they are the sexual misconduct eligible investigators. The other thing we have is the community assistance unit, which works with not just complainants and victims who come to CCRB who are victims of domestic violence, but really a lot of different types of victims who might be in need of services, and we try and help them get the services they need other than just a CCRB investigation into the incident that brought them to the CCRB. So those are the things that we're doing on the sexual misconduct front, Ms. Simmons, and they don't directly line up to what the speaker brought up right now, but you're correct that they are connected. And I think, ma'am, what you said before about abusers using the system, I think you're correct. And I think a lot of the changes that were implemented I'm showing my age, I would say late 70s, early 80s, that were supposed to make the system, because in the past you would have people would respond to domestic violence, members of service would walk someone around the block and then move on with their day, and it evolved into a must arrest. And when people file cross complaints in a must arrest situation, then everyone gets arrested. So it becomes, it is what you were describing as a situation where discretion was removed from police officers, and that may have created a new problem as compared to the old problem when that was fixed by removing that discretion from folks. So I think it is very complicated. It's not entirely within our ability to address, but I think you're correct that it's something we should look at and see how we are addressing it and look at it further.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ira, I understand we're going to try again to access Michael Myers.
Correct. Mr. Myers, can you hear us or can you unmute?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome,
Mr.
Mr.
Myers.
Myers.
Well, the technical problem's on your end, not mine. I just want y'all to know that. You gotta get rid of this WebEx, whatever you're using, because it doesn't work. I don't know who's contracting, who's related, who's connected with it. You gotta get rid of it. You gotta get a new system. Okay, now I'm angry now. Okay, why do we have to wait for public comment for the staff and the board members to speak on issues that we raise in the public session? You should be bringing to us your comments, your criticisms of the police commissioner, your comments, your observations about the articles in the New York Times and elsewhere. We shouldn't have to wait for the public comment section of the CCRB to bring these matters to your attention. Somebody on the staff and somebody on the board should be furious. Somebody should be at least curious if you're not furious. Secondly, what's the status of the chair of the CCRB? We heard that the mayor was demanding her resignation. Yet still, I keep seeing everything I read and from your website, she's still acting chair. So has a new chair been appointed? Why are we waiting so long? Why is the mayor being permitted to be lackadaisical and arrogant in terms of getting a permanent chair as opposed to an interim chair or acting chair of the CCRB? And with respect to the guidelines, I heard some of the comments from the executive director about the restoration of the budget and the budget cuts. And so that means to me, if I heard you correctly, all those things you changed that you couldn't investigate fully, all those complaints from CCRB, that now should be remedied in less than 3 months' time, because you got the budget restored. Is that not right? So why are we pussyfooting around in terms of getting this agency back on board and back in the business of correcting misbehavior? Finally, with respect to this police commissioner, nobody else is appalled by this guy. Why am I the only one who is complaining and criticizing this guy? This guy is for the police. He's not for the public. He's not a public person. He's not for the police department. I'm just for the public. He's for the police department. He is representing the uniformed police officers because he ignores the CCRB's recommendations. He ignores the administrative law judge's recommendations. He overrides you guys. Ain't nobody else insulted? Is nobody else angry? Is anybody else pissed off? How come nobody is demanding his resignation? You guys gotta stop pussyfooting. You are a public body. You are there to represent the public, not the city council, not the city, the public advocate, not the police commissioner. You're supposed to represent the public. And we are furious with you guys. You guys gotta get off your rumps and do your jobs. I'm finished.
Let me just note that, Mr. Myers, when you read things in the newspaper, that reporting is often based on information that is provided by and is transparently published by this agency. So the fact that something appears in the newspaper doesn't mean that it's the first time that it's coming to light.
But it's not coming from you. It's not coming from you, either before the article in the New York Times or after the article in the New York Times. You should bring it to the
Reading the
public.
data that we publish monthly, correct?
You guys are not you're just not outraged. I don't know what you guys, those seats must be very comfortable you're sitting over there, because nobody's getting up. You ought to be getting up and getting out. If you can't do your jobs correctly and angrily, get the hell off the board.
No, I was just pointing out that while the budget was passed last week, we now have to recruit and train new investigators. So I understand Mr. Myers' eagerness to reverse the policy. I share his eagerness, if not his anger, and we will move as fast as we can. But we have developed over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm very proud of the recruiting process, which gets us high quality people that reflect the city that we serve. And so I'm not, in my desire to get back up to speed, going to throw out the progress we've made in improving our recruitment of investigators. That's,
And I assume there's training time involved too,
Yes,
once they're
yes.
recruited. All right, any other speakers physically present who wish to be heard? Okay, I think we've exhausted the list. Do we have any old business to come before the board? Hearing none, do we have any new business? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a motion that we break into executive session. The agenda for executive session is that the board will consider one full board case. The executive director will discuss pending personnel actions, and the general counsel will provide updates regarding pending litigation. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? And none opposed. So we're adjourned to executive session. Thank you all.